Hi everybody, this is Annette from Sheridan Art and Designs. Welcome to part 2 of our Once Upon a Time Captain Hook jacket tutorial. We'll be using McCall 7821 as the base pattern, but we will be making some modifications, so we'll walk you through all the modifications that we are going to be making on this jacket. Let's get started. Okay, so we have our 2 pocket flaps done, and we've got our side front and side back sewed together on the left and right sides. Now the next steps are with putting the flap to the side front and side back, and then building out the bag pocket and then adding the skirt of the jacket. So there's really no deviation from the pattern at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and just follow the pattern as it is, and then when we get to the cuffs of the sleeves, we start doing the sleeves and the cuffs of the sleeves, then we'll come back. It's very much the same technique here with the binding, but I'm going to go ahead and just continue to follow the pattern instructions as is. They're very straightforward. These are very simple steps. Hi, I'm just popping in real quick because I was working on the pocket and I didn't like the way it was laying, and so I did a quick 2 stitches to make it lay nice and flat, and I didn't have to fight the seam. So as you can see on the one here, it's just really not laying right, and that seam just wants to keep flipping the wrong direction no matter how much I press it. It just is not cooperating. And then this one, you can see is laying much nicer. I will still need to tack on the sides when I do those side seams, but it's actually laying much nicer. And on the underside, what I did was the pattern does not call for any understitching in the pocket. So as I was constructing the pocket, when I stitched the pocket to the skirt, I understitched just in between the seam allowances of where the pocket is going to attach to the front of the pocket pieces. So when you're putting the 2 pocket pieces together, you're going to leave that opening in the middle, and that's where I understitched, was right in between the turn points where you're leaving this. So this is the opening, and that's where I understitched, and it just makes that lay so much nicer. It causes the seam allowance to actually roll the way it's supposed to roll. And I did the same thing when I stitched the pocket. You can actually see the stitching here. When I stitched the pocket to the flap and the top part, I just did a quick understitching right in between, again, right where that opening is. Understitch there, and that allows that seam, it causes that seam allowance to roll the way it's supposed to roll as well. Now that we've finished inserting the pocket into the sides of the coat, it's time to move ahead and do all of the long seams on the jacket. And so you can see I've already gone ahead and sewn the front to the side front and side back, as well as created the back with the center back seam and attached that at this back shoulder seam. So the majority of the outer shell is done. It's time now to lay in the sleeves. So we've gone ahead and constructed the sleeves, as you can see, and we have the cuff attached. And I have this seam still exposed because I'm still going to do a finishing on that, but we can still lay in the sleeve just fine. And putting the sleeve together is quite easy. Just do your stay stitching across the top, and then sew the upper sleeve to the lower sleeve, and you're ready to go. The important thing on the sleeves is to make sure that you have your markings, because that's how you'll be lining things up. And so you want to make sure everything is well marked. All right, the next step really is, you can see I have one sleeve already set in here, and it came out just beautifully. I don't have the shoulder pad in yet. That will be the step after we set the sleeves in, but I did want to show you how to set in the sleeve. Some people can be a little intimidated by sleeves. They're really not that hard if you know a couple of tips and tricks. So the first tip was to mark everything, because these markings become keenly important as you set the sleeve in. And then secondly, we're going to do right sides together. So I'm going to invert my jacket. So I have the inside of the jacket exposed to me, and then I'll put the right side of the sleeve in. Now, one thing to remember on sleeves is that you're working with two giant biases. The arm side on the jacket is all bias cuts, right? So they're all curves, it's all bias, which means it's going to have some stretch and give. The sleeve itself is the same way. If we look at the sleeve, you know, this is just a big curve. And so we have to be very careful when we're handling the sleeve and the arm side, because if we're manhandling it too much, tugging, pulling, pushing it through the machine, it can stretch that either the sleeve head or the arm side out, and it's not going to fit the way you want it to fit, or maybe the way the pattern fit. So we're going to be working gently, but very easily. So the first thing I do is take my markings and I match up those markings. So you're going to have a large circle right at the top of the sleeve head, and that is going to match to the large circle on your jacket. So I've got my large circle there and my large circle there, and I'm just going to match those two together. And right now I haven't done any easing. We did run the gathering stitch, but I haven't pulled on those yet to create any fullness or ease. I'm just going to put a clip there. And then the very next thing to do, at the very bottom of, kind of in the middle of that under sleeve, there should be a square. And that square, get my undersleeve up here, that square will match, there we go. This pleather can want to do its own thing sometimes. So just gently manipulate it as you can. And then so that undersleeve, that seems going to go there. Sorry, the square on the undersleeve is going to match up with that side seam. And then as you walk around, you'll find, let me just put a clip there. So now I have the top of my sleeve and the bottom of my sleeve anchored. So the sleeve head and then right at the side seam is anchored. And now I'm just going to work my way around the sleeve, and you'll find that you have a seam here and a seam here on the sleeve, and those actually line up very nicely. I'm going to open my seams because I'm going to finish them later. Press them flat. And then your notches, the next thing you come up to is your notch, and you want to make sure that your notches match and they line up very nicely. And I'm going to come back to the other side here. So coming from the side seam, working in the other direction, the first thing I come up to is notches. So I'm going to make sure the edges of my arm side and my sleeve are lined up. Probably put one clip there on the curve. Now on sleeves, I tend to pin or clip a little more closely together because it's a lot of curve, and you're going to be moving this a lot in the machine. So next tip is, if you have a sewing machine that has a free arm capability, and that means that the table or the base of the machine slides away and it leaves a free arm where you can put a loop of fabric completely around it and stitch. I know that a lot of people like to do their sleeves by using the free arm and inserting the sleeve and the arm side around that stitching arm of your machine, but I'm going to encourage you to not do that. And the reason is that if you've got your free arm here and you're putting your sleeve through that on top of that free arm, what happens is that as you're pulling it around, now we have to stitch this 2 times, right? The main seam and then a 1/4 inch into the seam allowance. So you're going to make 2 full rotations of that sleeve around that free arm. And if you're working especially with a heavy fabric like a pleather or a suiting coat, then what will happen is you're going to end up stretching your arm side and your sleeve out as you're moving it around that big arm. So I would encourage you to keep your sewing table or base in place, and then we'll just rotate the edge of the fabric through the sewing machine. Now, it's a little bit harder to do it that way, but I think you will find that you will end up with a much better fitting and unstretched, or at least not as stretched. I'll say unstretched because I've never had one stretch on me. Arm side and sleeve. And the trick to getting it through, not using the free arm, is really just taking your time, just matching up these seams as I'm talking. You just want to take your time, go slow, and it's okay to, it's certainly okay to even, sometimes I'll stitch only an inch at a time, go an inch, inch and a half, and then rotate my fabric. Inch, inch and a half, rotate my fabric. And the thing to remember is that you don't have to have the whole coat laying out flat and neat and manipulating it. In fact, I tend to bundle it, fold it neatly and bundle it to the side so that the area that I'm working on is all I have to worry about. And it also helps from stray pieces of that garment getting caught under, as you're turning it. You don't want, the hem of the coat, for example, to slide under where you're stitching. So it's just take your time and make sure that the area that you're stitching in, which is really only about 1 inch by 2 inches, because it's only the area that goes under the presser foot. That's all you have to worry about. Just make sure everything is flat. And by flat, I don't mean not gathered or easing of fullness. You still want to do that, but you're just not catching anything else underneath of the garment. So that's that tip, and I'm just going to continue to, I'm working my way up to the sleeve head now, and you can see I have this fullness that's hanging out about there, right? The sleeve is more full than the arm side. So now I have to start working on these gathering stitches. There we go. And I'm just going to very gently hold on to one of those threads and then just start easing some of that gathering around to take up some of this fullness. Let me pop those. Just going to, I think I have a knot in the back side of mine, so I'm just going to pop a couple of stitches so I can restart it. Okay. And then we're just going to continue to pull this through. Oops. and ease that around. And you do that until you have your sleeve completely eased and set in. So I'm going to continue to work on that, and I'll be back when I've got it all gathered and eased at the top and clipped in, and I'll show you what that looks like before I head off to the sewing machine. All right, so we have both of our sleeves in, and they're all finished. You can see they're set in, and I've trimmed down the arm side, and that's ready to go for me to finish that off. Now, the next step is to work on the lining, and as you know, I've been saying that I'm not going to line my coat fully because I wanted to do this quilted iconic design from the show. And so I'm choosing only to line the front and the collar. And I wanted to show you how that's going and what my next steps are, and then it will just be into the finishing details. So I've taken the front pieces of the quilted lining and I've stitched those to the upper collar, as you can see. And then the under collar is here. That's attached to the coat. So I've set it into the coat, and the first thing I did was start lining up this neck seam. And you can see my pins here. And what I did was I pressed the seam allowance of the under collar that's on the coat upwards, and then I pressed the seam allowance that's on the lining downwards. So I've got one going in this direction, one going in this direction. And the reason why I did that was so that I could nest those seams right up against each other, and it would distribute the bulk of that, because this quilted lining has 3 layers, and what that middle layer is quite thick, 100% cotton batting, and then you have, you know, the double layers of the pleather on the under collar. So you're talking about 5 layers of material there. So I wanted to distribute that bulk out a bit so we didn't have a big ridge here at the collar line. And so what I did was, once I had the seam allowances going in different directions, then I just pinned right through that seam and lined it up with the seam on the jacket. So you can see my pins are right there in the seam. And I did that all the way around. And then when I got to the back, I just kept the seam allowance going down with the under collar going up, and brought that right down to cover the seam. Now I will eventually, when I've got this all stitched in, just take my twill tape that I've been using throughout to finish the seams, and then just finish that off like that. I wanted this to have a nice finished polished look, and the twill tape really lends itself to doing that without having to do a full lining. I of course could have lined this, but with the where this coat is going to be worn, the temperatures are quite high, sometimes over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and so comfort. This was a comfort choice for my model. All right, and then so I wanted to, we'll spin this back around. So on this side, you can see I have this pinned, and I've got the front lapel clipped down to, I'll probably take these ones out. I clipped this one all the way down, but I will likely just pin it, clip it, and stitch it to the roll line for now. I'll base this in because I want to lift up this lining to put in those finishing details when I sew on the buttons. There's a twill tape that goes across the top to make that decoration, and then the button gets sewn on, and then I'll come back in and stitch that down and then bind it. That way all of the stitching from the outer details won't show up on the lining here. All right, so the next, I wanted to show you how I finished off the shoulder seam as well. This one is yet to be done, as you can see, but this one I have pinned in place and is ready to go over to the machine to sew. So again, with my twill tape, I'm going to stitch 1/2 of the twill tape to the lining only, and this way I don't get a line of stitching all the way through the coat. So I'm just stitching half of that, really only, it's just like 1/4 of an inch seam allowance down to attach it to the lining only, and then I'll come back in. You can see on this side better, and then I'll come back in and I'll actually whip stitch this. I'll hand stitch this edge down to the finished seam that's underneath, and that way I don't get, again, that third line of stitching on the outer coat, which I don't want to have. So this will be, this is the lining piece will be machine stitched, and then the finished edge going into the coat I will hand finish. I will do the same with all of these. Of course, I will do I'll go through and finish off, trim down, clip, and finish off all of my seams with the twill tape, so everything has a nice polished finished look at the end. Finishing the top of the collar, it makes this very easy because the collar is bound. Actually, the whole outer line of the coat has that binding around it, just like we did on the pocket flaps and the cuffs. And so this will just I'll stitch this all the way around and then apply the binding. I'll baste it all the way around, apply the binding as per the instructions of the pattern, and then turn it to the inside and then stitch in the ditch. And that will be it. So I just wanted to show you what I was doing with the lining, and then it's just finishing details after this part is done. So almost done with all the major construction. Okay, so we've finished the coat, as you can see, and after we finished the lining, there was just the inside seam details to finishing off those seams, and then the button detailing down the front. So I wanted to show you how I did the button detailing, and I've got one that's already set up and finished, ready to stitch on for you. You can see how it looks when you finish it, and then I'll do one here with you. So the bias tape, I'm using single fold bias tape, and you can buy it by the package, and I cut mine 7 inches in length. You can cut them whatever length you like and you feel looks best. I'm using the same color of thread, so I'll need a needle and thread and your button and an iron, and then we can get started. So just give it a quick press, and you don't want to move the iron around a lot when you're pressing anything that's on the bias. So bias tape just up and down for the pressing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually fold this in half and get the center point. And I'm just going to give that just a tiny quick press so it has a little crease there. And I'll use my chalk pencil to mark the crease so you can see that's where that crease was. And then I'm just going to take my needle and thread, and I'm going to, just on one side, I'm going to hand stitch. I'm just going to baste in a gathering stitch on one side. That's all. And that will help us create, so when we pull that gathering thread, it will help us create this curve very nicely. And that way you don't have to kind of fuss with, fold or trying to, make the puckers go away. This is a really fast, easy way to do it. So from your center, I start about an inch and a quarter to the right. Now, if you're left-handed, you'll start on the left and go to the right. Whichever direction, it makes no difference. And I'm just going to take some small gathering stitches. These are just basting stitches. So you don't have to, be super particular about them. I'm using about a fat 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch basting stitch. So they're not big, long basting stitches. But what you'll see happen is that as I pull this gathering thread together, it already starts to make that turn for us, which is exactly what we want. So then I'm just going to continue this on, and I'm going to extend my gathering stitches to about the same distance, 1 inch to 1 1/4 inches past that center line. So we just do this real quick. And there's no need to, secure the thread or anything like that. You're just going to get that basting thread in there. And then I lay it on my mat, and I can cut this off. I leave myself a little tail because you do want to use that to gather. So you want to leave yourself enough tail to be able to hold on to it. And then I just lay this on my pressing mat, and I take that gathering thread and just gather it. This one's being a little stubborn. Okay, just pull it and gather it. And then you can smooth those gathers around to the side. So you see how that just made a really nice rounded end here. And all I did was pull that gathering thread to pull the center tight. And then I just give it a quick press with a little bit of steam to set it. And there, it's ready to stitch down. Now I did an edge stitching on mine. So I stitched here, 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 and here. So just stitch all the way around the outer side, all the way around the inner side, and then it's stitched onto the coat, and then you just stitch your button into the middle there, and you've got your button detailing. All right, I hope you enjoyed that tip, and thanks for joining us to put the hook coat together. Join us on our next video next week.